In this video, we are going to continue to learn about connections in structural steel. This particular part that we're going to work on next is going to be a custom connection at the apex, and we'll talk about that and get going right now. I don't like to assume things. What is an apex? An apex is the top or the highest part of something, especially one forming a point. So in our case, it's going to be the top of our beams or rafters. In looking at our steel structure, the top of these individual rafters is the apex. As I mentioned, we're going to model a bit more complicated custom connection. We're going to be using these tools right here that are called our modifier tools under the steel tab. If we look in here, we have kind of a weird connection going on. This one looks to be cut off straight. This one looks to be cut off at an angle. What I want to do is I want to separate these, and I want to put a plate in between them, and then that will be welded, and then there will be plates here that will be bolted and attached. So we're going to customize this connection to allow for that to happen. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to use one of the modifier tools to add a gap in here so we can get that plate in between the two rafters. So we need to cut this beam. The modifier we're going to be using is the shorten modifier. You basically pick it, and then you pick the beam, and it will show where it cut it off. And if we look over here, this gives us the distance of that, how much it cut off. Sometimes selecting this can be a little tricky, so you might have to hit the tab key a couple times after you select it to be able to get it selected. Once I have it selected, I can look over here and I can see that distance is 1 and 31/32. I'm going to put a 1/2 inch plate in there, so I basically want that offset to be 1/4 of an inch. And I'm going to say apply. And if we look in here, that distance should be from this point here to this point right here. So we got our gap in there now, but you can see it's still at an angle. So we need to fix that in the next step. If you look over here, we have angle along height and we have angle along width. So I know my beam is at 15 degrees, so I'm going to change this angle along height to be 15 degrees, and I'm going to say apply. And that did not take care of it, so I believe it needs to be at -15 degrees, and hit apply. There we go. So now it's actually going vertically. If I wanted to use the angle along width, I could change that to 30 degrees and hit apply. And if we look at it from the top, you'll see it made it cut at an angle instead of straight across. So I'm just going to undo that because I don't want mine to do that, but I wanted to show you how to use the angle along width. It would be nice to be able to like mirror this modifier, but Revit does not allow you to do that. So we're going to have to create another modifier for the other part of the beam at the apex so that we can also get the offset from it so that we have the right spacing for the plate that we want to put in the middle. I'm going to go back to my steel menu and pick shorten again, and I'm going to pick the other beam now. And now again it's created my modifier, and again I need to change the offset. I want it to be at 1/4 inch so that I can get a 1/2 inch plate in the middle. So now I should have a 1/2 inch gap in there. And then the next thing I got to do is I also again have to straighten it up to where this connection is vertical. So I'm going to assume my -15 again and hit apply. And there we go. You can see now I have an equal space between the two, and everything is running vertically. As I always do, I don't want to assume, because sometimes it's hard to tell by looking at it in the three-dimensional view. So I don't want to assume that it is correct. So I'm going to go to my level 3 plan, and I'm going to create me a section on this side because this is the only one that I've changed. And I'm going to drag that across like that. And then I'm going to go in here and look, and I need to change this to fine. And if I come in here and look, you see I have equal spacing on each side of my grid. So that is set up correctly. So let's go back to 3D. Now that we have our space, we are ready to place the plate between our two beams. So again, if I go back to my steel menu and I select plate, the first thing I need to do is to set a work plane. So one of the options is to go with the grid line that's running down the middle here, which is our grid line B, which we can't see in this view. So if I go to my east elevation, then I'm looking at that connection, but I cannot see that shape of the beam. So if I set this to wireframe, now I can see those. Now that I can see my beam, I just have to set that work plane, and I'm going to go by name, and I'm going to pick grid B and say OK. Now I can use my rectangle tool, and I can place it in here like this, and click on finish, and we should have the plate in the middle. Now let's go back into our 3D view, and there we can see the plate. The first thing I want to do is I want to make sure it is a 1/2 inch thick, and it is. And then you can see that it's placed it in the center on that particular rafter. So to position it correctly, I'm just going to go to my site plan, and I should be able to see this plate in there if I change this to fine. And there is that beam, and I can use my align tool and align it here and align it there. And now you can see my beam is in there. And it looks like it's off just a little bit, but I'm not going to worry about that. This is close enough for our purposes. So now I'm going to go back to my 3D view, and you see now we have the steel plate in the middle, which is what we wanted. Now that we have it in the middle, we have to have some way of fastening it to our beams. So to do that, we need to add additional plates. So let's go back to our steel menu and pick plate again. So we need to set our work plane again. And this time I'm going to do pick a plane. I'm going to say OK. And I want to make sure I get this back plane back here of this area here. So if I click right there, you see the blue lines going up, and it's picking that particular plane. So if I go ahead and pick that plane, I can always do show, and it will show me if I picked the correct plane. I'm just going to turn that off now because it's kind of hard to see everything with that on. Let's navigate to our south elevation in order to see that. So now I can draw what I want in for my plate. So I'm going to come here from the midpoint, and I'm going to follow the slope of the beam. And then I'm going to draw another line off of that at about right here. I want this line to be about 4 inches off of that center point. And then I'm going to draw another line over here and do the same thing. And I want it to be 4 inches off of the center point. And then I'm going to draw a line from here to here, and we can probably make this a little bit smaller. Probably want that to be somewhere around 5 inches or so. I need to close my plate off, so I'm just going to pick that point, and I'm going to come up to about here. And then I'm going to use my trim and extend to make sure these corners are connected, and I'm going to delete out this center point. So now I've made a plate shape for my beam. And now I'm going to click on my check mark, and it says the created elements are only visible in detail level because mine is set to medium. I need to change that to fine, and now we can see the plate. We do need to set the thickness of our plate, and it's set to 1/2 inch, and that's probably a little bit too thick. Let's take that down to 1/4 inch and say apply. Let's go back into our 3D view, and if we look at this, it looks great. Now we want this plate welded to our other plate. I'm going to show you how to do that next. So I'm going to zoom in here. Right up here you see we have fabrication elements and we have welds. If I click on that and then pick this plate and I hold down the control key and I pick that plate, and now I just need to pick the line of where I want the weld, and you see it placed the weld there. Now if I look in my properties and I do the pull down, you see I have different types of welds, and this one selected is the fillet weld, and then I can also give it the thickness. So we can kind of play around with these things. We can change the thickness of the weld, we can change the length of the weld, we can change the location of the weld. Is it done in the side or is it done in the shop? Is it continuous? The pitch, some other items here. I'm going to just leave my settings as they are and say apply. So next I want to select my weld and hold down the control key and select my plate. And what I want to do is I want to copy this on this side plus both sides of the other side of the beams. So I'm going to go to my site, and I know I still have those selected because it says 2 items over here. If I change my setting to wireframe, there I can see where I have them selected, and I'm going to mirror them using the pick axis option, and I'm going to pick my grid line. So now it's mirrored that way. I'm going to deselect these elements now that I have it on each side of my plate. Now I want it on each side of my beam. So I'm going to select those, and I'm going to use my pick axis, and again I'm going to pick my center line, and now I have them on both sides. So if I go back to my 3D, you see I have them on this side and I have them on this side. So the last thing we have to do is we have to attach these to the beam. So we're going to add some bolts. So to add our bolts, we're just going to go up here to bolts, and we're going to pick regular bolts. And then we have to pick the elements. So we're going to pick this. And we're going to come over here and pick, hold down the control key and pick that one. And then we hit enter. And now we have to pick which surface that we want it to be on, and I'm just going to pick this surface here. And now we can draw in what we want, and I'm going to start out by just drawing a rectangle here, and then I'm going to go back to my south elevation. I can select this and I can rotate it by 15 degrees, and then I can adjust these to be wherever I want them to be, to where it's kind of centered in there. Once I do that, if I click on the check mark, you see it placed my bolts. If I want to make some modifications to this, I can still do that. Again, I can change the type of bolt, I can change the grade, I can change the diameter. Some other things I can do here is I can change the number and hit apply. Change this one back to 2, change this one to 1, hit apply. So I can also see what my offset distance is from the edge, so I could actually move that. Etc. So again, I can make all kinds of adjustments. I'm going to put it back to the way that it was. Let me go back to my 3D view, and now we can see we actually have, if we go all the way around, we have bolts and washers, and they are the right length based on the thickness of our products. So again, I can select these and I can go back into my site view and I can do my mirror, pick my axis, and now I have bolts on both plates. Even though it looks really cool, it is not officially a connection. So how can we turn this into a connection? That's what we're going to learn to do next. So we'd like to make this a custom connection that we can use on our other rafters and maybe potentially on other projects in the future. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my Still tab. I'm going to go to Connection. And before I do this, I want to come in here and change this to back to my generic. So I'm going to pick Generic Connection. And then I'm going to pick this beam and hold down my Control key and pick this beam. And if I hit Enter, you'll see it gives us that standard generic connection symbol. So the next thing we can do is we can actually customize this. If we click on the Customize button, it gives us the name of Custom Connection. I'm going to call this Custom Apex Connection, and I'm going to say OK. And now you see it brings up some of my other tools. So what we want to do is we want to add all of the elements to our connection. So if we click on Add and we just, I'm going to rotate this around a little bit and down. If we select this, it selected everything. You notice it even selected the modifiers. We need those modifiers so that when we use this connection on our other rafters, it automatically cuts them the way that we want them. So once we do that, then we click on Finish. And now when we click on this, we have an actual connection. The biggest problem with creating a custom connection like this is that we can't go in and change parameters like we can on the other connections that come with the Revit package. We couldn't change the angles and stuff with this one. We would have to create another one. So now we're ready to copy this to our other locations. So again, I'm going to go back to Connection and I'm going to select this beam and I'm going to hold down the Control key. And now I'm going to go to my pull down and I'm going to find my Custom Apex Connection. And if I click on that and hit Enter, you'll see it did all of that in one easy step. So I'm going to go ahead and continue to do that and finish my Apex connections on the rest of my building. Now we have our steel structure connected at the top and we have created a custom connection. In the next video, we're going to create a custom anchor connection. So this will conclude this video.